Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for the short statement she made concerning the incident in Salisbury, and I think we all thank the Emergency and Security Services for their response, and we await updates on the progress of investigations into the cause of that incident. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow is International Women's Day, a chance to both celebrate how far we've come on equality for women, but also to reflect on how far we have to go, not just in this country, but around the world. Later today, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is due to meet Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the ruler of Saudi Arabia. Despite much talk of reform, there has been a sharp increase in the arrest and detention of dissidents, torture of prisoners is common, human rights defenders routinely sentenced to lengthy prison terms, unfair trials and executions are widespread, as Amnesty International confirms. As she makes her arms sales pitch, will she also call on the Crown Prince to halt the shocking abuse of human rights in Saudi Arabia?
Well, first of all, can I the right honourable gentleman for telling me that it is International Women's Day tomorrow. I think I look forward to welcoming from Saudi Arabia to this, well, Labour shouting shame. Can I just say that we have with Saudi Arabia is historic, it is an important one, and it has saved the lives of potentially hundreds of people in this country. And can I say that link is not just the view that I hold. The Shadow Foreign Secretary this morning said Arabia is an important one. She also went on to say that doesn't mean we should be pulling up our punches, and I agree. Concerns about human rights with the Crown Prince when I meet him, and can I just say, as the right honourable gentleman, I welcome the fact that the Crown Prince will be sitting down with as the guest of a female Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's a year on. The government is, of course, still suppressing a report which allegedly found evidence of Saudi groups here in the UK, thus threatening our security. When will that report come out? Humanitarian disaster is now taking place in Yemen. Millions face starvation. 600,000 children have cholera because of the Saudi-led bombing campaign and the 100,000 children with cholera is something that I think everyone in this House should take seriously. Suspended arms sales to Saudi Arabia, but British arms sales have sharply increased. Advisers are directing the war. It cannot be right that her government is colluding in what the United States of war crimes. Will the Prime Minister use her meeting today with the arms supplies and demand an immediate
Well, Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman raised two questions there. On the first point, review, this government is committed to stamping out extremism in all its forms. I launched my right honourable friend, the current Home Extremism Commissioner. The review that we had gave us the best picture of how extremists operating in the UK sustain their activities. It did. The most important finding is that, contrary to popular perception, Islamist extremists draw most of their financial overseas sources. Now, I understand that for reasons of some of the personal content, however, Privy Councillors have been invited to go to the Home Office to read this report. That invitation was extended, I believe, to the Shadow and other Privy Council colleagues on the Labour front bench are free to go and read that report. The second issue that the humanitarian situation in Yemen. We are all concerned about the appalling humanitarian situation in Yemen and the effect it is having on people, particularly the effect it's having on women. We've increased our funding for Yemen. Last year, for 2017-18, we increased it to over £200 million, and we are the third to the Yemen. We're delivering life-saving aid that will provide nutrition support for 1.7 million people, clean water. Now, and I was pleased when I went to Saudi Arabia. I raised with him then the need to open the port of Hodeidah to humanitarian and commercial supplies. I'm pleased to say that Saudi Arabia then did just that. This vindicates the engagement that we have with Saudi Arabia. With them. Their involvement in Yemen came at the request of the legitimate government of the Yemen. It is backed by the United Nations Security Council. But on the humanitarian issue, I would say it is for all parties to allow humanitarian aid to get through to those who need it.
Of course, we all want all possible humanitarian aid to go to Yemen and help those people that are suffering. But I refer her to the remarks Secretary, the member for Sutton Coldfield, who said, and I quote, "We must not be afraid to condemn the Saudi Air Force that killed and maimed innocent men, women and children. A ceasefire has got to be urgent in Yemen." Mr. Speaker, why does the Prime Minister think that the Conservatives?
Well, can I... question that he raised in relation to the Yemen and the conflict that is taking place there in the Yemen. We have encouraged the Saudi Arabian government to ensure that when there are allegations that activity has taken place which is not in line with international humanitarian law, they investigate that, they learn the lessons from it. Have already been published as a result of that. But on this issue of arms, can I also say that he seems to be at odds with his shadow Foreign Secretary? The arms industry is not something I'm seeking to undermine, as long as... And went on to say that she thought the UK can sell arms to any country as long as they're used within the law. Well, yes, we agree. Regime in this country, and when there are allegations of arms not being used within the law, and to be lessons to be learnt on that. On the issue, I say to the right honourable gentleman that nobody in this House wants to see anybody having to sleep rough on the streets of this country. That is why this is a government that is putting millions of pounds extra into dealing with rough sleeping. It's why we're piloting the Housing First approach in 3 of our major cities, because what we want to do is to ensure not just that we deal with the situation where somebody is found sleeping rough, but actually that we prevent people from sleeping rough in the first place.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, in November, the Chancellor Sleeping Task Force and £28 million for 3 pilot schemes to tackle homelessness. I understand 4 months on, not a penny has been spent on that programme. Mr. Speaker, there is a homeless... Rough sleeping has doubled since 2010. Doesn't the Prime Minister to say we're going to tackle rough sleeping by 2027?
Well, can I say we're going to eliminate it? That's our aim by 2027. But let me just perhaps... if I was to update the right honourable gentleman, because the task force that he referred to has, in fact, met. importantly, because the right honourable gentleman has asked me this previously, more importantly, this isn't the only group of people we bring together to look at rough sleeping. We have an expert advisory group that has been meeting over recent months and whose reports and whose information and whose to that task force. He talks about homelessness. Statutory homelessness is less than half of its peak in 2003. More to do. That's why we want to see more homes being built. On rough of course we want people to have a roof over their head, but we see something like half of rough sleepers with a mental health problem. That's why it's not just a question of improving his lives around. If he really cares, he'll look at the complexity of this issue. People a roof over their head. It's about dealing with the underlying problems that lead to the rough sleep.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the government showed such urgency in setting up this task force that it took it, and it still hasn't actually achieved anything. Many people in this country are very about the levels of rough sleeping in this country, and many volunteer. And I got a letter this week from Barry to feed the homeless because of the lack of care and help for these individuals is unoccupied buildings in his town and many others. Does the Prime Minister believe that her cut services by 45% since 2010 has had some effect on sleeping?
Right honourable gentleman, that if he thinks that the only way you solve issues is by bringing people together at a meeting, I have to tell him that is not the way to solve issues. The way to deal with these issues is actually to get out there on the ground doing something. That's why we are funding 48 projects accommodation and to overcome the issues like mental ill health and substance abuse. Councils around the country that have been taking that severe during the providing accommodation for people who are sleeping on the streets, but also dealing with the underlying issues that lead to somebody sleeping on the streets. It's why we are ensuring that we're implementing housing first in a number of sleepers into accommodation as a first step to rebuilding their lives. This it's about people. It's about ensuring we are taking the action necessary that people face and which leads to them being rough sleeping. It's also about ensuring for people to have, and that's why what we're doing to revise the planning laws when they have planning permission should be welcomed by the right honourable gentleman when he stands up.
I don't think any of that would become as much comfort to the rough sleepers that I meet that are begging every day just to find enough money to get into a night shelter. Mr. Speaker, Association, Lord Porter warned where council tax can plug the gap. That's the result of the government's slashing of council budgets. Speaker, after this deathly cold winter, we have more than twice as many people one step away from that fate as 60,000 homeless households in temporary accommodation. We are the 5th richest country in the world. On our streets is a mark of national shame. With fewer social homes being built, less support barely met, just how does the Prime Minister really propose this?
We propose to deal with the issue of homelessness and to deal with those issues of those be able to have a home of their own by building more homes in this country. We propose to deal with it, as I said earlier in this week, by ensuring that in this country. But I have to say, there are more council houses have been built than were built under 13 years of Labour. We've seen more social housing being built in the last 7 years. So if he wants to look at the issue of a record in relation to housing, he should look at the record of the last Labour government. And of course, it was the record of the last Labour government that was described as bringing, the record was described,
You were asking about tennis earlier, but you appear to be attempting some sort of imitation of crochet. And you shouldn't be making these curious gesticulations. They make you look even odder than... I thought your behaviour was a tad odd, and I'm concerned about your well-being. I think the members from Wirral and Hull will look after you. The Prime Minister...
of the last Labour government on housing was described as in crisis and bringing misery and despair. Who said misery and despair? The right honourable gentleman, the leader of the opposition. Labour didn't have a good record on housing. I agree. It's the Conservatives that are delivering the home.